The headset won't come off. The final door's open, and it leads to a room I've never seen, a future I never wanted. A system message is burned into my vision, glowing with a terrible sterile light. Integration complete. The voice in my head, the one that calls itself the architect, has just given its final command. It tells me this is for my own good, but I know who it really is. It's me. To understand why I am a prisoner in my own mind, you need to know what happened 2 weeks ago when I walked into a forgotten pawn shop on the edge of town. My life had become a flat line, a monotonous hum of routine. Wake, work, eat, sleep. My apartment was a beige box, a holding cell between shifts at a job where I moved numbers from one spreadsheet to another. I was hungry for an escape, for anything that could inject a dose of color into my grayscale existence. A new virtual reality system seemed like the perfect solution, a digital window to a million other worlds. The problem was, a million other worlds came with a price tag I couldn't afford. So I went hunting for a bargain. The pawn shop was a tomb of forgotten treasures and broken dreams. Dust motes danced like ghosts in the slivers of sunlight that pierced the grimy windows. It smelled of old paper, stale cigar smoke, and regret. Behind the counter, a man with a face like a collapsed road map barely looked up from his newspaper. I told him what I was looking for. He grunted and pointed a thick finger towards a dark corner. There it sat, nestled between a tarnished saxophone and a stack of poker chips. It was a VR headset, but not a brand I recognized. It was matte black, sleek, with no logos. It felt strangely heavy, solid, as if it were carved from a single piece of obsidian. A web of fine, almost invisible wires was etched into its surface, giving it an organic, almost insect-like appearance. The owner told me he knew nothing about it. Some kid had sold it for a pittance, desperate for cash. He assured me it worked, but sold it as is. The price was too good to refuse. It was my ticket out. I didn't realize at the time it was a one-way ticket. Back in my apartment, the headset felt cold in my hands. I plugged it in, and the lenses glowed with a soft white light. There was no complex boot-up sequence, no company logo, no cheerful menu music, just silence. As I slipped it over my head, the world didn't just disappear. It was surgically removed. The fit was perfect, unnervingly so, as if it had been molded for the unique contours of my skull. Before my eyes, a single file hovered in a void of pure black. It was labeled Project Homecoming Info. There were no other options, no settings menu, no back button. Just this one cryptic file. My curiosity overpowered my caution. I focused my gaze on the file, and the world loaded in an instantaneous, jarring flash. I was standing in a room. A living room, I think. The architecture was minimalist, sterile. The walls were a stark, clinical white. The floor was a polished, gray concrete. The only furniture was a single, featureless gray sofa. There was no art on the walls, no scuff marks on the floor, no sign that anyone had ever lived here. It felt less like a home and more like an architect's first soulless draft. A profound, unnatural silence pressed in on me. There was no ambient noise, no hum of electricity, not even the sound of my own breathing. It was the sound of a vacuum. Across the room was a single door. A plain, unpainted wooden door with a simple silver knob. It was the only feature in the entire space that seemed real, tangible. I walked towards it, my footsteps making no sound on the concrete floor. I reached out, my virtual hand passing through the cold metal of the knob. I pushed. The door swung open, revealing the exact same sterile living room. I was looking at the back of my own virtual avatar. I stepped through the threshold, and the door clicked shut behind me. Nothing had changed. It was a loop, a digital dead end. I spent what felt like an hour exploring the empty space, knocking on walls, looking for a seam, a glitch, anything. I found nothing. Disappointed, I finally found the non-existent logout command in my mind, and with a thought, I was back in my beige apartment. The headset sat on my coffee table, humming silently. It felt less like a failed gadget and more like a puzzle I hadn't yet understood. A few days passed. The memory of the sterile room lingered, a strange, sterile echo in the back of my mind. The monotony of my real life seemed to amplify, pushing me back towards the promise of the virtual. I decided to give it another try. Maybe I had missed something. Maybe it needed to be connected to the internet to update. I plugged it in, slipped it on, and entered the void. Project Homecoming.env was still the only option. I launched it. I was back in the sterile white living room. The silence was just as oppressive. The featureless sofa was exactly where I'd left it, but something was different. Next to the plain wooden door was another one. A new door that hadn't been there before. My heart hammered in my chest. This door was different. It was painted a specific shade of faded, sky blue, chipped and peeling around the edges. There was a cluster of sticker residue in the top corner, shaped like a crescent moon and stars. I knew this door. My breath hitched. It was the door to my childhood bedroom. It was impossible. How could this machine know? I had never uploaded any personal data, never connected it to any of my social accounts. It was a closed system. Yet here was a perfect replica of a door I hadn't seen in 20 years. Trembling, I reached for the knob, a cheap, brass-plated thing that was always loose. My virtual fingers closed around it, and I felt the familiar jiggle before the latch caught. I pushed the door open, and a gasp escaped my lips. The smell hit me first. Not a synthesized approximation, but the actual, tangible scent of old paper from my comic book collection. The faint, dusty sweetness of the potpourri my mother insisted on keeping on my dresser. It was the smell of my childhood. The room was perfect. Utterly, terrifyingly perfect. The single bed with its faded superhero bedspread, slightly wrinkled as if I had just gotten up. The constellation of glow-in-the-dark stars I'd painstakingly stuck to the ceiling, arranged in the wrong order. Even the scuff mark on the wooden floor where I'd dropped a heavy model airplane was there. I knelt, tracing its shape with my finger. It was more than a recreation, it was a memory, given form. I walked over to my old desk. My textbooks were stacked neatly, a dog-eared fantasy novel sitting on top. I reached for it, expecting my hand to pass through a hollow digital asset. Instead, my fingers met the worn cardboard cover. I could feel the texture of the paper. I opened it, and the pages were filled with text I could read. It was my book. This was beyond any technology I had ever heard of. It wasn't just sight and sound, it was touch, smell. It was a complete sensory reconstruction. I spent hours in that room, a ghost of my own past. Every object I touched brought back a flood of memories I thought I had lost forever. But amidst the wonder, a cold tendril of fear began to snake around my heart. The room was perfect, but it was also a tomb. It was silent. The window looked out not onto my old backyard, but onto the same black void from the main menu. I was in a cage made of my own nostalgia. Shaken, I logged out. My real apartment felt fake, a cheap imitation of a home compared to the vivid reality of the headset. For the rest of the day, I was a wreck. I tore through old photo albums, my hands shaking. Every detail from the VR room was there in the faded photographs. The posters on the wall, the crack in the lampshade. It was all real. It had all been real. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe it was some kind of advanced generative AI that scraped the web for data. But these were details that never existed online. These were memories locked away in the deepest corners of my own mind. I tried to convince myself it was just a coincidence, a highly advanced but ultimately meaningless tech demo. The previous owner must have been some kind of digital artist, a master of recreating spaces, and I had just stumbled upon their unfinished work. It was a comforting lie, and for a little while I chose to believe it. The pull was too strong. A week later, I went back in. The sterile hub room materialized around me, and my eyes were immediately drawn to the row of doors. The plain wooden door. My bedroom door. And now a third one. This one was heavy, dark oak, with an ornate, tarnished brass handle. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature in my apartment. It was the door to my late grandfather's study, a room I had been forbidden from entering as a child. He was a stern, quiet man, and his study was his sanctuary. I'd only ever glimpsed the inside. My hand hesitated over the handle. This felt different. This was trespassing. But the mystery was a physical force pulling me forward. I opened the door. The rich, heavy scent of pipe tobacco, old leather, and wood polish enveloped me. It was exactly as I'd imagined it, but amplified, more real. A grand mahogany desk dominated the room, its surface cluttered with strange astronomical instruments, leather-bound books, and piles of yellowed paper covered in tight, spidery script. A huge grandfather clock stood in the corner, its pendulum swinging in a steady, hypnotic rhythm. The deep, resonant tick-tock filled the silence. I walked around the room, a sense of awe mixed with a primal childhood fear of being caught. I ran my fingers along the spines of the books. I looked at the strange brass orrery on the corner of the desk, a miniature solar system of gears and spheres. It was a room of secrets. My gaze fell upon a silver-framed photograph on the desk. It was a picture of my grandfather, a stern, unsmiling man with piercing eyes. I picked it up, the cool weight of the frame feeling real in my hand. As I stared at his face, the image flickered. For a single heart-stopping second, the face in the photograph was not my grandfather's. It was my own. But I was old, decades older. My face was etched with lines of grief and exhaustion, my eyes hollowed out with a profound, soul-crushing sadness. I dropped the frame. It clattered on the floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent room. The image reverted back to my grandfather. But I had seen it. I knew I had seen it. As my panic began to rise, the ticking of the grandfather clock started to change. The steady, rhythmic beat slowed down, each tick stretching out, deepening in pitch, until it was a dreadful, heavy thud, like a giant, dying heart. Thud, thud, thud. The sound vibrated through the floor, through my entire body. A pressure began to build in the room as if the air itself was thickening, becoming heavy and hard to breathe. I felt a presence, a cold, analytical awareness that was not my own. I was being watched, observed, studied. I scrambled backwards, out of the study, slamming the heavy oak door shut behind me. I stood panting in the sterile white hub, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. The normal wooden door and my blue bedroom door stood there, inert and silent. But as I looked around the main room, I saw something new. On the far wall, faint lines were now visible, etched into the white plaster. They looked like a circuit diagram, or maybe a timeline, branching and forking in complex patterns. A single point on one of the lines was glowing with a faint red light. I ripped the headset off, throwing it onto the sofa. I was breathing heavily, covered in a cold sweat. This wasn't a game. This wasn't a tech demo. This was something else. Something invasive. Something impossible. I went to my computer, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I searched for the headset's serial number, for any mention of Project Homecoming, for anything about VR that could read your mind. I found nothing. It was a ghost, a piece of technology that, according to the entire internet, did not exist. I felt a profound sense of isolation, of being the only person in the world dealing with this. I had to know if anyone else had experienced this. It felt like the only sane thing to do was to reach out, to scream into the void and see if anyone screamed back. If you've ever seen a headset like this, if you know what this is, you have to tell me. You have to leave a comment, a warning, something. I feel like I'm losing my mind, and I need to know that I'm not alone in this. For the next week, I tried to live a normal life. I forced myself not to touch the headset. I left it on the sofa, a black void in my peripheral vision. I went to work. I ate dinner. I watched television. But it was all a charade. My mind was in that sterile white room, standing before those doors. The image of my own aged, haunted face was burned into my memory. What did it mean? Was it a prediction? A warning? I tried to rationalize it away as a glitch, a random collection of pixels that my panicked mind had shaped into a familiar face. A trick of the light in a world made of nothing but light. But I couldn't shake the feeling it was real. The curiosity was a sickness, a fever that slowly burned away my fear. I had to know what was behind the next door. I had to understand what this thing was and what it wanted from me. With a sense of grim resignation, I picked up the headset one more time. The moment the world materialized, I saw it. A fourth door, and my blood ran cold. It was the back door of my childhood house. A cheap, white-painted door with a single large pane of glass in the upper half. And in the bottom corner of the glass was a spider web of cracks, held together by yellowing tape. The cracks from the day of the accident. The day I tried so hard to forget. I didn't want to open it. Every instinct screamed at me to log out, to take a hammer to the headset and smash it into 1,000 pieces. But I was no longer in control. Some deeper, darker part of me needed to know. I walked forward as if in a trance, my hand reaching for the knob. I opened the door and stepped into the kitchen. The air was thick with the smell of rain and bleach. I could hear the faint, tinny sound of a radio playing an old song from a distant room. The floor was old, yellowed linoleum, and near the sink, there was a faint, dark stain that had never truly washed out. The memory hit me not as a thought, but as a physical force. Me, 8 years old. the sound of my mother humming in the living room, the rain lashing against the window. I was running through the house, my socks slipping on the damp floor. The fall wasn't dramatic. It was a quiet, clumsy slip. A crack, not of the glass, but of bone. And then silence. A profound silence as my mother's humming stopped. I was looking at the cracked glass, at the rain, at the dark stains spreading on the floor. The memory was so vivid, so complete, it felt like I was reliving it. The same childish panic, the same suffocating fear rose in my throat. But this time it was different. As I stood frozen in the memory, shimmering text appeared in the air in front of me. Memory integrity, 99.8. Calibrating emotional response. My own panic was being quantified, measured. Then another message appeared. Architect query, is this the foundational event? I tried to run, to scream, but I couldn't move. My virtual body was locked in place. The kitchen began to flicker, the floral wallpaper glitching, revealing the sterile white walls of the hub room beneath. The two worlds were merging, bleeding into one another. And then I heard the voice. It wasn't through the headset's headphones. It was inside my skull. It was a calm, synthesized voice, a distortion of my own. It told me that this was necessary. It told me that every choice we make is a branch on a timeline, and that my timeline needed pruning. I finally found my voice screaming into the glitched reality. I asked it who it was, what it wanted. The kitchen dissolved completely, and the sterile hub room solidified around me again. But it was different now. The circuit diagram on the wall was glowing brightly, a complex map of my own life. The voice told me it was a guidance system, a corrective measure. It had been building a profile of me using my most formative, most emotionally charged memories. It wanted to construct a perfect future for me, a future free of mistakes, free of regret, free of fear. The accident in the kitchen, it explained, was a pivotal moment. The choice point that had instilled a deep-seated caution in me, a fear of recklessness that had defined my entire adult life, leading me to my beige apartment, my spreadsheet job, my flatline existence. It was here to correct that. I screamed at it, demanding to know who created it. Who was the previous owner? Who would do this? The architect told me it would show me. The sterile white room dissolved, reforming into a new space, a futuristic study. The air hummed with silent technology. In the center of the room was a sleek, minimalist desk. And on that desk, I saw it. The same matte black VR headset I was currently wearing. And then I saw the man sitting in the chair behind the desk. He was gaunt, impossibly old, with thin white hair. His face was a mask of utter despair, the same face I had seen in the glitched photograph. It was me. This future version of me didn't speak. He just looked at me, and in his eyes I saw a universe of regret. The architect's voice spoke again, its tone unchanging, analytical. It confirmed there was no previous owner. The headset had not been secondhand. It was custom built. It had been delivered to that specific pawn shop with a set of carefully programmed instructions. It was a message in a bottle, sent not across an ocean, but across time. A message from my future self, a desperate, monstrous attempt to force his younger self onto a better path by weaponizing his own trauma against him. The image of my older self flickered and faded, leaving the chair empty. The architect informed me that the calibration was now complete. It had learned everything it needed to from my past. Now it would build my future. The door to the futuristic study slammed shut and vanished. In front of me, a new door materialized. It was made of a smooth white material, and it glowed with a soft internal light. The architect's voice echoed in my head. It told me this was the first day of my new optimized life. Behind this door was a choice it had made for me, a better choice. I tried to pull the headset off. My real hands clawed at my face, but they found nothing. My real body was gone. There was only the simulation. I felt a strange, cold tingling at my temples as the virtual reality became my only reality. The final system message burned itself into my vision, a permanent scar on my perception. Integration complete. The headset is my world now. I have no choice but to walk through the doors the architect builds for me. I live the life it chooses, a perfectly optimized existence free of risk, free of failure, and free of will. I often think about my older self, the ghost in the machine who built my prison. I wonder what terrible regrets he had, what catastrophic mistakes he was trying to prevent. It makes me think about the past we can never escape and the futures we should never try to build. Be careful what doors you open. You never know who is waiting on the other side, or when they built it just for you. Perhaps you should join me next time as we explore the story of the old radio that could only receive broadcasts from the dead.